Well, you mentioned a bit about that Euro Tour event, so let's talk a little bit more about it. At the time of recording, we still don't yet know what the draw will be like in Kiel, but who do you fancy to go and have a deep run?
Yeah, even without the looking at the draw, which we don't have yet, looking at the seedings for this event coming from the Pro Tour Order of Merit, and it's hard to even predict from that draw alone with where the seedings are. You've got the top quarter, Luke Humphreys, Dimitri van der Berg, Michael Smith, Dirk van Dijvenbode, and one of the bottom quarters of the draw, you've got Michael van Gerwen, Johnny Clayton, Nathan Aspinall, and Joe Cullen. So two really tough quarters of the draw without putting in all the unseeded players. But looking at the Pro Tour rankings, I think you can't help but mention that this is going to be an important weekend for Gerwyn Price. He won the first Euro Tour of 2022, so he's going to be defending that on his Pro Tour ranking this weekend, and he's going to need to go on a very deep run this weekend to stay in that Pro Tour top 16, possibly even win the whole tournament, but get to the final at least, I think. But he's still in the first four Euro Tours, and I'm not sure when the cut-off is for the next two or three of them, but after that, he'll want to stay in that top 16, get nearer the top 10, top 8. And we know from last year, he was someone that skipped a lot of the Euro Tours, I think 6 in the end. And we know this year there's going to be fines coming in this year from the PDC for players that continue to do that. But if Gerwyn Price is out of that top 16, he won't need to worry about withdrawing. He'll need to worry about qualifying. And that's not something that you'd expect for the world number 4 to have to do. But it is an important weekend for Gerwyn Price. And for that reason, I think he is going to be one of the players to watch. And I fancy him to make that final day, make that final session and give himself the best chance of defending that prize money, and even better in it, 25 grand, turn it into 30 would push him a little bit higher up on that Pro Tour Order Merit. And away from Gerwyn Price, I mentioned a few of the title winners that we've had these last 2 weekends, and we had Ryan Searle on the show last week, and he admitted he didn't enjoy the Euro Tours last year, going from playing in 1 or 2 to being in all 13. He mentioned it was not something that he particularly enjoyed doing, all the travelling, and he said this year there's going to be a change in mindset for these events, and this is going to be the first weekend for him to test that new mindset out to see if it works. So I'm expecting him to go far again, maybe make the final day, final session, and have a tilt at the title. And 2 other players, and I mentioned them in the last question, and these are 2 players who are among the unseeded players. They won through the Monday afternoon qualifiers, and who would have thought Monday lunchtime darts would become so important in the PDC, but it is now with the way these qualifiers are going on Mondays instead of Fridays now. But Daryl Gurney, 4 out of 4 so far in these qualifiers. Raymond van Barneveld, 3 out of 4. Both are throwing some really good stuff in these first few weeks of the season. And starting with the handicapper's nightmare, he's slid down the rankings for a little while now. He's down in the mid to high 20s in the rankings, and he'll want to start that climb up and arrest that slide. And these Euro Tours, I think they are going to be important for a player like Daryl Gurney to get that stage time and play in front of the big crowds, get a few wins under his belt and kick on. And that could be just what he needs to maybe go on a deep run at one of the majors, maybe the UK Open next week or maybe one later on in the year. So yeah, I fancy Daryl to maybe have a good run. I was going to say Raymond van Barneveld as well, but just my luck, we could see both of them draw each other in the first round this weekend. So I don't want to say both just in case they draw each other, but yeah, I fancy one of those to have a good run as well.
Well, I'll take the one that you said you weren't going to say, but then did say it, but then didn't say, but then did say. But I will say Barney, because I, as you said, he is playing well. He's playing better than well. So far, over the course of the year in the Players' Championship events, he's up to 11th in averages, just a fraction off of one of the other people he mentioned, Ryan Searle, ahead of Peter Wright, who's only been 12th so far. Granted, he's only played 4 matches since he skipped one of the weekends. But it's really, really looking like the Barney of old. Maybe a couple points off of him when he was at his most consistent and at his best, which was, number 1 in the world. He's not number 1 in the world right now. He's nowhere near number 1 in the world right now, but he is looking like a deserved top 32 player. He's looking like maybe he can push on and get back to the top 16. And I remember when we went back his tour card a little over 2 years ago now, I can't remember what we exactly said. I thought that, if he finds his game, he'd get back to the top 64. I did not think he'd get back to the top 32. I was wrong. I certainly didn't think he had any chance to get back to the top 16. He really does. He's playing well. And if he can just get that little bit more consistency in the Pro Tour events, including these Euro Tours, that will get him into the World Match Play, will get him into the World Grand Prix. And we know once he gets on television, he can beat anyone. He beat Gerwyn Price at the event that Gerwyn Price is unbeatable at, from 8-2 down, to come back and win that match. Barney's playing really, really well right now. And, you mentioned it, so much of it comes down to the draw. And that's why, he could draw Daryl Gurney and go out very first match. But he also could draw Daryl Gurney and beat him to 0. He's playing well. He just hasn't strung it together enough to move back into that top 32 of the Pro Tour Order of Merit. But a good run on the Euro Tour, and he'll have, as you mentioned, 3 opportunities over the next couple months in the first 4 Euro Tour events, will help that immensely. And I think he's playing well enough to do it. Beyond Barney, there's a couple others that I had down here as well. From the seeds, you mentioned Ryan Searle. I'll mention him as well. He's the only player who's made 2 semifinals so far in those Players' Championships to date. And they weren't just 2 semifinals, there were 2 finals, winning one of them. The one thing that was always missing from his game was consistency. He'd disappear for literally months at end and then would be unplayable. Has he found some consistency? It's way too early to tell. But right now, he's at that unplayable stage that we've seen from him before. And when he's unplayable, he is nearly unbeatable. It's going to take a good effort to beat him right now. And that means he's someone to look out for. Another seed, you mentioned how one Welshman needs a big run to stay on the seeds for the Euro Tour. I'll mention another one, Johnny Clayton, right now in the race to be seeded for the 5th and 6th Euro Tour events. I might be at one of those, not as a player, but as a fan. But to be in that, he's currently 15th, just a little bit ahead of 17th place Jose de Sousa, who's only 6,000 pounds behind him. And there's some other players, Dimitri Vandenberg, Gabriel Clemens, Stephen Bunting, Gerwyn Price, who are within a deep run here of catching up to him. But the thing is, Johnny Clayton's playing really, really well so far. He's leading all players in the Pro Tour Players' Championship averages to date, and it's not just by a fraction. It's by more than half a point over Joe Cullen and by nearly 2 points over the guy who's third. Without looking, do you know, Alex, who's third in averages so far?
Is it Darrell Pilgrim?
No, it's not Darrell Pilgrim. I mean, it is a player with a tour card.
No, that Darrell Pilgrim was going to be my guess. I can't have another one.
Jim Williams.
Wow.
Jim Williams is third. He's the only Josh Rock is just under 2 points behind Johnny Clayton. But Jim Williams is 1.7 points behind him. So Jim Williams is the only player other than Joe Cullen who's anywhere remotely close to Johnny Clayton so far, and it's really not all that close. Clayton is playing phenomenally. He hasn't gotten the full rewards for that yet, but he's playing well enough. He does have a very, very, very difficult potential second match, assuming they both get through the first one with Michael Van Gerwen. But he's the one player who always seems to give Michael Van Gerwen problems, even when MVG's playing well. I also fancy Clayton to do well. And I'll mention just one more, a debutant on the Euro Tour, because he's a first-year tour card holder, but has done pretty darn well so far in his first year on the tour card. A couple deep runs in the Players' Championships, won through a few of these qualifiers. 31st in averages so far, Richard Veenstra. Look out for him to make a hot start on the European Tour.